Hello everyone. Today we will discuss chapter 20, Life in the Gupta Age. System of administration. In contrast to the Mauryas, the Gupta kings adopted pompous titles such as Parameshwara, Maharajadiraja and Paramabhattaraga. This signifies that they ruled over lesser kings in their empire. Kingship was hereditary, but royal power was limited by the absence of a firm practice of primogeniture. The throne did not always go to the eldest son. This created uncertainties of which the chiefs and high officials could take advantage. The Guptas made munificent gifts to the Brahmanas, who expressed their gratitude by comparing the king to different gods. He was looked upon as Vishnu, the protector and preserver. The goddess Lakshmi is represented invariably on the other side of the coins as the wife of Vishnu. The numerical strength of the Gupta army is not known. Evidently, the king maintained a standing army which was supplemented by the forces occasionally supplied by the feudatories. Chariots receded into the background and cavalry came to the forefront. Horse archery became prominent in military tactics. In the Gupta period, land taxes increased in number, and those on trade and commerce decreased. Probably the king collected taxes varying from one fourth to one sixth of the produce. In addition to this, whenever the royal army passed through the countryside, the, the local people had to feed it. The peasants had to supply animals, food grains, furniture, etc. for the maintenance of royal officers on duty in the rural areas. In central and western India, the villagers were also subjected to forced labor called vishti for serving the royal army and officials. The judicial system was far more developed under the Guptas than in the earlier times. Several law books were compiled in this period. For the first time, civil and criminal law were clearly defined and demarcated. Theft and adultery came under criminal law. Disputes regarding various types of property came under civil law. Elaborate laws were laid down about inheritance. During this period also, many laws continued to be based on differences in varnas. It was the duty of the king to uphold the law. The king tried cases with the help of Brahmana priests. The guilds of artisans, merchants, and others were governed by their own laws. Seals from Vaishali and from Bitta near Allahabad indicates that these guilds flourished exceedingly well in Gupta times. The Gupta bureaucracy was not as elaborate as that of Mauryas. The most important officers in the Gupta empire were Kumara They were appointed by the king in the home provinces and possibly paid in cash. Since the Guptas were possibly Vaishyas, recruitment was not confined to the upper Varnas only, but several offices came to be combined in the hands of the same person, and the posts became hereditary. This naturally weakened the royal control. The Guptas organized a system of provincial and local administration. The empire was divided into divisions, bhuktis, and each bhukti was placed under the charge of an upariga. The bhuktis were divided into districts, vishayas, which were placed under the charge of Vishayapadi. In eastern India, the Vishayas were divided into Vithis, which again were divided into villages. The village headman became more important in Gupta times. He managed the village affairs with the assistance of elders. With the administration of a village or a small town, leading local elements were associated. No land transactions could be effected without their consent. In the urban administration, organized professional bodies were given considerable share. The seals from Vaishali show that artisans, merchants, and scribes served on the same corporate body, and in this capacity, they obviously conducted the affairs of the towns. Besides this common organization, artisans and bankers were organized into their own separate guilds. We hear of numerous guilds of artisans, traders, etc. at Bitta and Vaishali. At Mandasore in Malwa, silk weavers maintained their own guilds, and at Indore in the district of Bulandshahr in western Uttar Pradesh, oil pressers had their own guilds. It seems that these guilds, especially those of merchants, enjoyed certain immunities. In any case, they could look after the affairs of their own members and punished those who violated the customs and the law of the guild. The system of The system of administration described above applied only to North Bengal, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and some adjoining areas of Madhya Pradesh, which were ruled directly by the officers appointed by the Gupta kings. The major part of the empire was held by feudatory chiefs, many of whom had been subjected by Samudragupta. The vassals who lived on the fringe of the empire carried out three obligations. They offered homage to the sovereign by personal attendance at his court, paid tribute to him, and presented to him daughters in marriage. It seems that in return for these, they obtained charters for ruling in the areas. The charters marked with the royal Garuda seal seem to have been issued to the vassals. The Guptas thus had several tributary princes in Madhya Pradesh and elsewhere. The subordinate position of the princes turned them into feudatory vassals. The second important feudal development was the grant of fiscal and administrative concessions to priests and administrators. Started in the Deccan by the Shatavahanas, the practice became a regular affair in Gupta times, particularly in Madhya Pradesh. Religious functions Religious functionaries were granted land free of tax forever, and they were authorized to collect from the peasants all the tax all the taxes which could have otherwise gone to the emperor. The villages granted to the beneficiaries could not be entered by royal agents, retainers, etc. The beneficiaries were also empowered to punish the criminals. Whether state officials were paid by grants of land in Gupta times is not clear. Abundance of gold coins would suggest that higher officials were paid in cash, but many officers may have been paid by land grants. Since much of the imperial administration was managed by feudatories and beneficiaries, the Gupta rulers did not require as many officials as the Mauryas did. They did not require too many officers also because the state did not take part in economic activities on any big scale as it did in Maurya times. The participation of leading artisans, merchants, elders, etc. in rural and urban administration also lessened the need for maintaining a large retinue of officers. The Guptas neither needed nor possessed the elaborate administrative machinery of Maurya times, and in several ways, their political system appears to be feudal. Decline of trade and rise of landed classes. We got some idea of the economic life of the people of Gupta times from Fahian, who visited different parts of the Gupta Empire. Among other things, he informs us that Magadha was full of cities and its rich people supported Buddhism and gave charities. But during this period, we notice a decline in foreign trade. Till AD 550, India carried on some trade with the Eastern Roman Empire, to which it exported silk. Around AD 550, the people of the Eastern Roman Empire learned from the Chinese the art of growing silk. Thus, this adversely affected the export trade of India. Even before the middle of the 6th century AD, the demand for Indian silk abroad had slackened. In the middle of the 5th century, a guild of silk weavers left their original home in western India in the country of Latha and migrated to Mandsaur, where they gave up their original occupation and took to other professions. The striking development of Gupta period was the emergence of priestly landlords at the cost of local peasants. Land grants made to the priests certainly brought many virgin areas under cultivation, but these beneficiaries were imposed from above on the local tribal peasants who were reduced to a lower status. In central and western India, the peasants were also subjected to forced labor. Social developments. Land grants to the Brahmanas on a large scale suggest that the Brahmana supremacy continued in Gupta times. The Guptas, who were originally Vaishyas, came to be looked upon the Kshatriyas by the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas represented the Gupta kings as possessing the attributes of gods, and the Gupta princes became great supporters of the Brahmanical order. The Brahmanas accumulated wealth on account of numerous land grants, so they claimed many privileges which are listed in the law book of Narada. The castes proliferated into numerous subcastes as a result of two factors. One, the on the one hand, a large number of foreigners had been assimilated into the Indian society, and each group of foreigners was considered a kind of Hindu caste. Since the foreigners mainly came as conquerors, they were given the status of Kshatriya in society. The Hunas, who appeared in India towards the close of the 5th century, ultimately came to be recognized as one of the 36 clans of the Rajputs. Even now, some Rajputs bear the title Huna. The other reason for the increase in the number of castes was the absorption of many tribal people into Brahmanical society by way of land grants to the ruling chiefs of the tribes was ascribed a respectable origin, but most of the rest of the tribal people were given a low origin, and every tribe now became a kind of caste in Hindu society. In some ways, the position of Shudras and women improved in this period. This They were now permitted to listen to the epics and the Puranas. They could also worship a new god called Krishna. From the 7th century onwards, the Shudras were mainly represented as agriculturalists. In the earlier period, they always appeared as servants, slaves, and agricultural laborers working for the three higher varnas. But during this period, the untouchables increased in number, especially the Chandalas. The Chandalas appeared in the society as early as 5th century BC. By the 5th century AD, their number had become so enormous and their disabilities so glaring that it attracted the attention of the Chinese pilgrim Fahian. He informs us that Chandalas lived outside the village and dealt in meat and flesh. Whenever they entered the town, the upper caste people kept themselves at a distance from them because the road was supposed to have been polluted by them. Buddhism and Brahmanism. Buddhism no longer received royal patronage in the Gupta period. Fahian gives the impression that this religion was in very flourishing state, but really Buddhism was not so important in the Gupta period as it was in the days of Ashoka and Kanishka. Especially it suffered in Magadha. Brahmanism had come to the forefront. The two gods who commanded the worship of their followers were Vishnu and Shiva. Vishnu emerged as the god of devotion and he came to be represented as the savior of the Varna system. Numerous legends gathered about him, and a whole Purana called the Vishnu Purana was compiled in his honor. Similarly, a law book called the Vishnu Smriti was also named after this god. Above all, by the 4th century AD, there appeared the famous Vaishnava work Bhagavad Gita, 4th century AD, okay, which taught devotion to the Lord Krishna and stressed the performance of the functions assigned to each Varna. A few Gupta kings were worshippers of Shiva, the god of destruction, but he came in the forefront. But he came in the front rank at a later stage and does not seem to have been as important as Vishnu in the early phase of the Gupta rule. Idol worship in the temples became a common feature of Hinduism from Gupta period. Many festivals also came to be celebrated. Agricultural festivals observed by different classes of people were given religious garb and color and turned into good sources of income for the priests. Okay, figure 20.1 shows image of Naranarayana from Diogar. Figure 20.2 shows temple at Sanji built during the Gupta period. Okay. The Gupta kings followed a policy of tolerance towards the different religious sects. We find no example of persecution of the followers of Buddhism and Jainism. This was also on account of the change in the character of Buddhism, which had come to acquire many of the features of Hinduism. Art. The Gupta period is called the Golden Age of ancient India. This may not be true in the economic field because several towns in North India declined during this period. But the Guptas possessed a large amount of gold, whatever might be its source, and they issued largest number of gold coins. Princes and richer people could divert a part of their income for the support of those who were engaged in art and literature. Both Samudragupta and Chandragupta II were patrons of art and literature. Samudragupta is represented on his coins playing the lute, veena. Chandragupta is credited with maintaining his court nine luminaries or great scholars. Okay, image of the Buddha from Sarnath. Okay, 20.4 shows image of Yamuna from Achichatra, district Bareilly. Okay. In ancient India, art was mostly inspired by religion. Survivals of non-religious art from ancient India are few. Buddhism gave great impetus to art in Maurya and post-Mauryan times. It led to the creation of massive stone pillars, cutting of beautiful caves, and raising of high stupa or relic towers. These stupas appeared as dome-like structures on round bases, mainly of stone. Numerous images of Buddha were fashioned. In the Gupta period, we find an over 2-meter high bronze image of Buddha, which, which was recovered from Sultanganj near Bhagalpur. Fahian saw an over 25-meter high image of the Buddha made of copper, but it is not traceable now. In the Gupta period, the beautiful images of Buddha were made at Sarnath and Mathura. But the greatest specimen of Buddha art in Gupta times is provided by Ajanta paintings. Although these paintings covered the period from the 1st to 7th century AD. Okay. Most of them belong to Gupta times. They depict various events in the life of Gautam Buddha and previous Buddhas. These paintings are lifelike and natural. They are marked by the brilliance of their colors, which have not faded even after 14 centuries or so. 20.5 figure shows that image of the Buddha from Mathura. Okay. 20.6 shows Ajanta painting of an Apsara. Okay. Since the Guptas were supporters of Brahmanism, for the first time we get in the Gupta period images of Vishnu, Shiva, and some other Hindu gods. At many places, we get a whole pantheon in which the chief god appears in the middle and his retainers and subordinates appear on the same panel all around him. The leading god is represented large in size, but his retainers and the subordinate gods are drawn on a smaller scale. This represents a clear social distinction and hierarchy. The Gupta period was poor in architecture. All we get is a few temples made of brick in Uttar Pradesh and a stone temple. We may mention the brick temples of Bittar Gawon in Kanpur, Bittari in Ghazipur, and Diogar in Jhansi. The Buddhist university at Nalanda was set up in 5th century, and its earliest structure made of brick belongs to this period. Literature. The Gupta period is remarkable for the production of secular literature. To this period belong 13 plays written by Basa. What has made the Gupta period really famous is the work of Kalidasa. Kalidasa wrote Abhignana Shakuntalam, which is considered to be one of the best 100 literary works in the world. It was one of the earliest Indian works to be translated into European languages, the other work being Bhagavad Gita. The two things can be noted about the plays produced in India in the Gupta period. First, these all are comedies. We do not come across any tragedies. Secondly, characters of the higher and lower caste do not speak the same language. Women and Shudras featuring in these plays use Prakrit. During this period, we also notice an increase in the production of religious literature. Most works of the period had a strong religious bias. The two great epics, namely Ramayana and Mahabharata, were finally compiled probably in the 4th century AD. The Ramayana tells us the story of Rama, who was banished by his father Dasharatha from the kingdom of Ayodhya for 14 years on account of the machinations of his stepmother Kaikeyi. He faithfully carried out the orders of his father and went to live in forest, where his wife Sita was abducted by Ravana, the king of Lanka. Eventually, Rama, with the help of his brother Lakshmana, led an expedition to Lanka, defeated Ravana, and brought back Sita. The story has two important moral strands. First, it idolizes the institution of family in which a son must obey his father, the younger brother must obey his elder brother, and the wife must be faithful to her husband in all circumstances. Second, Ravana symbolizes the force of evil, and Rama symbolizes the force of righteousness. In the end of in the end, righteousness triumphs over the forces of evil and good order over bad order. The Mahabharata is essentially the story of the conflict between two groups of cousins, the Kauravas and Pandavas. It shows that kingship knows no kinship. Although the Pandavas were entitled to their share in the kingdom left by Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas refused to give them even a single inch of territory. This led to prolonged fratricidal war between the Pandavas assisted by Krishna and Kauravas. Eventually, the Kauravas were worsted in the fight and the Pandavas came out victorious. This story also represents the victory of righteousness over the forces of evil. The Bhagavad Gita forms an important part of the Mahabharata. It teaches that a person must carry out the duties assigned to him by his caste and rank under all circumstances without any desire for reward. The Puranas follow the lines of the epics, and the earlier ones were finally compiled in Gupta times. They are full of myths, legends, and sermons, etc., which were meant for the education and edification of the common people. The period also saw the compilation of various smrtis or the law books written in verse. The phase of writing commentaries on the smritis begins after the Gupta period. The Gupta period also saw the development of Sanskrit grammar based on Panini and Patanjali. This period is particularly memorable for the compilation of Amaragosha by Amarasimha, who was a luminary in the court of Chandragupta II. This lexicon is learned by heart by students taught as Sanskrit in the traditional fashion. On the whole, the Gupta period was a bright phase in the history of classical literature. It developed an ornate style which was different from the old simple Sanskrit. From this period onwards, we find greater emphasis on words than on prose. We also come across a few commentaries. There is no doubt that Sanskrit was the court language of Guptas, although we get a good deal of Brahmanical religious literature. The period also produced some of the earliest pieces of secular literature. Next is science and technology. In the field of mathematics, we come across during this period a work called Aryabhatiya, written by Aryabhatta, who belonged to Patliputra. It, it seems that this mathematician was well versed in various kinds of calculations. A Gupta inscription of 448 from Allahabad district suggests that the decimal system was known in India at the beginning of the 5th century AD. In the fields of astronomy, a book called Romaga Siddhanta was compiled. It was influenced by Greek ideas as can be inferred from its name. Romaga Siddhanta. The Gupta craftsmen distinguished themselves by their work in iron and bronze. We know of several bronze images of Buddha which began to be produced on a considerable scale because of the knowledge of the advanced iron technology. In the case of iron objects, the best example is iron pillar found at Delhi near Mehrauli. Manufactured in the 4th century AD, the pillar had not gathered any rust in the subsequent 15 centuries, which is a great tribute to the technical skill of the craftsman. It was impossible to produce such a pillar in any iron foundry in the West until about a century ago. It is a pity that the later craftsmen could not develop this knowledge further. Okay, figure 20.7 shows iron pillar at Delhi. Okay, you can see them here. Okay, so we have completed chapter 20. In the next video, we will discuss chapter 21, spread of civilization in Eastern India. Thank you for listening me. We'll see you next class. Thank you very much.